While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Hey, reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America who are retired or already thinking about retirement or already on their way to retirement or maybe just contemplating retirement. You've tuned into iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, we're joined by Bruce Bruinsma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation, which we'd like you to check out. Download the app in your app store, Retirement Reformation, or check us out online, retirementreformation.org. If you're looking for resources on how you can retire with God's glory in mind and making an impact for the kingdom, Retirement Reformation has tons of resources for you. Today, Bruce Bruinsma wants to talk about the issue of dealing with fear during those last 30 or 40 years of your life that we call retirement. Bruce Bruinsma, welcome back to iRetire4Him. Why are we talking about fear today?
Well, I think there's, when all of us, regardless of our age, but particularly as you get into that 60, 65, 70, and then really when you stretch over perhaps that 70, there's a whole series of new fears that I think come up.
Like what? What are you talking about? What do you mean?
That are focused on, I'll give you an example. The example is there are physical fears, like, am I going to be able to carry out the mission that God has given me because of some physical issues? Now, I've been sitting at this desk for the last 2.5 hours. And part of the time, and you and I have been chatting and talking, and we've interviewed others, and I've been on the road for the last 2 days. We drove 10 hours on 2 days to get from Chicago to Colorado Springs. And so when you suggested that we take a break for a moment and kind of walk down the hall, and I said, that's a good idea. When I stood up, my knees went out. Honest to goodness, I just thought, I don't know if I'm going to be able to stand up here. And it was just a scary moment. Now, after I stretched out and so on and so forth, I think we're coming back. But, I'm not going to be participating in the, in the marathon and the Olympics. But your legs still got to get you from here to there, and your knees. And those are issues that come. As a matter of fact, I was reading in Psalm 71. And there's just a little snippet in there where David throws in, when your hairs are gray and your knees are weak, will you be forgotten? Do not forget me when my hairs are gray and my knees are weak. Do not forget me. And so even in David's time, in his humanness and his connectivity with God, he realized those issues. And I think that's a fear-based statement, that I'm afraid that that's going to happen. And so that we've talked about anxiety, we've talked about loneliness, but I think there are other sets of fears that we have to deal with in our senior times. One of them, for example, is, what's my next conversation with my grandson going to be like? And so we have all these areas of unknown that we should be totally prepared for. We ought to be totally on top of, but I think in our humanness, fear is very real.
Well, and so I live in a retirement neighborhood here in Florida, and here's some of the fears that I hear. Fear of losing your eyesight, fear of losing your hearing, fear of losing your driver's license, which is, people always say, if I lose my driver's license, I'm going to lose my freedom. No, you just have to call Uber all the time. I'm not going to get in a car with a stranger. So fear of strangers. That's what the argument I get from my mom all the time. Like, I'm not getting in a car with a stranger. But there's the fear of not having enough money, the fear of your friends dying, the fear of losing touch with your kids, the fear of when your kids are arguing with each other, the fear of your grandkids not following the Lord, the fear, I mean, I
goes
just,
on and on.
It does.
The the fear of your legacy, what is going to be remembered, the fear of not having enough money, and there's, interestingly enough, the fear of having an abundance and being fearful that you're not doing the right thing with it.
You're screwing up. You're fearful you're going to screw up your kids with too much money. I mean,
exactly.
So, Bruce, how do we deal with this fear? As people, we're both in the spectrums of retirement. I'm 55. You're 80, and we got people from 55 to 105 who are retired in this country. So we span 50 years of retirement years. How do we deal with when fear tries to smother us?
Well, here's one of the questions that I think we can ask ourselves. I need to ask myself and you and all of our listeners. Can you really trust the feelings that you're having, that they are God-based and that they are coming from you and they're not coming from the outside in a way, in a cultural way, that they're not from the devil, if you wish to use that direct language? Can you trust the feelings that you have and deal with them that way? I think that's a question that can help. As a matter of fact, I think one of the action steps you can take, and part of that comes from, I just had on my desk here, one of the books called Charting Your Course, that can help, is to write out what are the lies that the evil one wants you to believe about yourself or the future. We know that in our 70s, we're concerned about physical issues. We know in our 85 to 104, we're concerned about our mental issues, but that we're really dealing with what is true.
Yeah, I wrote about, in my book, iRetire4Him, I wrote about lies as well, because that is something, the enemy loves to, promote lies in our lives. But I think it's important, Bruce, that we recognize that when we have fear, we're doubting an attribute of God.
We are.
Because when we have fear, we're thinking that God's not really in control, that God really can handle this. When we have fear, whatever that fear may be based on, but that doesn't take away the feeling we have to really work through this. This is a discipline to walk away from fear. What do you do when you face fear?
One of the things is to realize that there is no time when there is nothing on your mind. There is always something on your mind.
Well, okay, and not on your mind, because you and I have nothing on
you and I,
inside our mind. Okay, all right.
Inside their mind, yeah,
Right.
Not on it, but inside your mind. And so filling what is inside your mind with God's truth rather than culture's message or the evil one's deception is absolutely critical. And God has created us in such a way that we have the capacity to be able to understand and to be able to decide what it is that we are going to think. And as we think, will guide what it is that we do. So when I'm feeling fearful, for example, just in the situation I described a few minutes ago, where I stumbled out of the office here, oh my goodness gracious. And by the time I got down the hall a ways, the knees were loosened up and was good. And I was saying to myself in that mind think, Bruce, you've been out of town for a couple of weeks, so you haven't been exercising, and you need to get back to that exercise to keep your legs strong so you can do what it is that God wants you to do. Oh, there's my answer. I need to get back to exercise. That helps to drive away that fear when you have God's action plan in front of you.
You're listening to iRetire4Him as we talk today about fear. What do we deal with? How do we deal with fear as chronologically superior folks? As people think about retirement or already in retirement, what role does fear play in the life of a Christ follower, and what role does Jesus play in eliminating our fear? We'll be right back with our conversation. The second part of our conversation with Will Randall, talk about job transition, and then Bruce and I will pick up this conversation in the third segment of our podcast, talking about fear as a Christ-following retiree. We'll be right back.
Membership has its privileges, and with the Retirement Reformation, it's true. We have 3 levels of membership to access our growing wealth of resources. We also provide discipleship and training to bring the Retirement Reformation alive in your life. So join us. Go to retirementreformation.org and click on the Membership tab. Choose the level of membership that will help you rethink, retool, reframe, and reform your retirement today. The basic level is free, so you can get started today. Take the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. retirementreformation.org. Let's get back to more I Retire for Him.
Hey, welcome back to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. Bruce, on last week's podcast, we had a guest for the middle segment, Will Randall, and he's back with us today. Will, during that first segment, we started talking about your job transition, but we got into your Jesus story, and it was so powerful. We kind of let you tell the whole story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Bruce, now let's talk about job transition, because Will is in the midst of saying, okay, God, what's next? Bruce.
Exactly. And that whole question about what's next, for all of our listeners, we are all in that position. Okay, God, what's next? So for some of us, it's clearer than others, and some of us are at points of transition. But when we transition, whether it be in a career or a job or geography or whatever it may be, when we approach it from a Christian perspective, with God's guidance, versus just our own perspective and our own selfishness, it's quite different. So Will, talk to us a little bit about, if you can, about now approaching a job transition, but from a faith-based perspective, on what that means to you. Can you do that?
Well, I believe I learned the hard way that, separate from Him, I'm capable of complete disaster. And I think when I realized I had a lot of resentment for where I was at professionally, and I didn't know who was at fault exactly, but I just found during this pandemic that I had a lot of time to just, for some reason, when everything was noisy, to just kind of get quiet and with things that were important in general, like where do I really stand on some of these things that are causing people to go lose their friendships, and stuff. So kind of as a starting point. And then when these job opportunities came up, I kind of felt like that was almost a way to kind of rehearse, if you will, how am I going to apply a decision like this? Where do I stand on decisions like that? And again, the closest, I honestly hadn't thought of incorporating my career with my faith. I mean, it was like compartmentalized. I came close to it because there was a 5-year period when I worked as a facility manager at that very church where we came to know the Lord. 10 years later, I in a tough spot. So I had worked but it shouldn't even. So I thought, well, if I worked in a Christian environment, that's how. But I'm realizing now that how am I going to carry myself, my faith with myself into every aspect of my life, because I can't compartmentalize. And so that's been, and having an opportunity actually to consider, as a matter of fact, where it would be within, faith-based group of men, just that is just, I never thought of it. And when it became something that I realized could exist, I thought, well, what an awesome, because I really have felt during this time, the last couple of years before decisions like this are in front of me, what do I enjoy? What am I good at? Instead of what people might think I might be qualified for, what is it that, I'm really trying to, as I kind of feel like, hopefully I make a decision on a career that is it, if whatever that is. But, just being willing to look at what do I want to do and where am I gifted and where am I not best gifted and really who else better than who made me to, but then learning how do I listen to the Lord? I'm around people that say I heard from the Lord and I could say, yeah, I'm praying about it. But what is that? Look, what am I really in trying to even develop the discipline of what it is to hear from the Lord, which could be similar to how others share or not. And I found myself realizing that there are ways that He does speak to me. And that was like breakthrough, to be honest. And so now I can kind of, okay, and there's a lot of things I think that might go into that, but just really trying to make sure I make the right decisions professionally and personally in the few days I have ahead. I promise not to answer every question so lengthy. But
No, I think the messages there that we can take away from that is there's a couple of them. One of them is clearly not to compartmentalize, but to make our Christian walk and who we are part of everything that we do, whether we're talking family, we're talking friends, we're talking ministry opportunities, we're talking job, we're talking career, and to do that. So is your wife as excited about what might be ahead as you are, or is there still some anxiety and strain there?
well, it's funny because my wife would, when I told her that you were gonna, invited me on the podcast to talk about, as I best understood it, anxiety during a career transition. We both got a chuckle because she deals with anxiety in a very serious way, like it's a debilitating thing. I don't worry about anything, and I had to really learn what it was to live with someone, because I don't think it was as evident earlier in life. So change is not easy for her. Whereas me, I look at it as, okay, we're going to have some choices and some change, and I'm ready for it. I had to be mindful that for her, it created a lot of anxiety. And so that's also, if I'm more patient, if I'm in a good place with the Lord, I'm going to hear the Lord. If I'm in a good place with the Lord, it's all connected, because in my flesh I get real irritated with her, and I would like, let's not get that far ahead. Let's just and so it's a real struggle what she needs and how I can support her. And so it really it's presented a lot of things, and I had to be reminded that we're in this together.
And you bring up such a great point, Will, that, okay, change doesn't bother you too much, and you're not experiencing a lot of anxiety with this transition, but your change is having an impact on your wife. But she's your spouse. She's your one together in marriage. And so that's a great conversation starter, because Bruce, when we do this thing and whatever we do causes an impact on our wives, I am sure, Bruce, you've caused Judy some stress over the almost 60 years of marriage. So, Will, you're not alone. My wife, Martha, if she got on, I'd be in deep trouble. So
Yeah.
when you and your bride experience some anxiety talking about this transition, about this change, do you guys pray together? What do you do to help deal with some of the anxiety? Are you bringing God into the center of that?
Not nearly like we should. I think, again, compartmentalize. We've been, doing our private time, but we haven't collectively, we talk about, so that definitely is, I think, if something we prayed about, and it's so many different things. It's so many different things, like, the options would provide a move, bringing us closer to two of our children, leaving one here. There's just a lot of emotion in that transition. Our one son's getting married in a week, and so, me, I live at a rapid pace. I have a different project going on here. I have this one job, and I always have a lot of things, going on that, I don't probably give myself time to dwell on some of it. So it's been a good time for me to, slow down and remember that she's involved. But the prayer, I think, is it's a good reminder of that. That'll probably just, calm it all down. But yeah.
Well, that we talk about in the Retirement Reformation, that as we grow older, well, physically we may slow down just a tad, mentally sometimes at some point when we're up there, that we may slow down a little bit. The opportunity to grow closer to God, and also to be able to grow in our emotional maturity, to be able to handle these kinds of issues in a God-honoring way, to reduce the amount of stress, to reduce the amount of anxiety, to be able to recognize the needs of our spouse and our kids, and perhaps some of our friends, and then the anxiety that comes from, now I got to go make a whole bunch of new ones. And so all of that is there. And if in walking with God in that process is, we just remember, what are the fruits of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, and generosity. And so to be able to claim those things and to know that they exist at these times is really critical.
Mhm.
So, Will, if there was someone who was in the process, roughly your age or maybe a little older, who's contemplating making a career change, what's just kind of the
And
last
a move,
advice?
let's throw that in there. It's not only a career
Yep.
change, but also a move.
Yep. What would
Yeah.
you what would be the executive advice that you would give them as they go through the process?
Well, I would say whatever it looks like to get connected with the Lord. If you're not in a way, and that was something for me. I had to really make sure, like on a good day, I don't turn my phone on for an hour, because if I turn that phone on, even though I'm sitting next to my Bible, phone always wins. So little disciplines like that. Make sure I'm because I think that's all important, that I get close. And then I think it's important to share, find a few people to share. And in fact, I'm fortunate that I found one that I could, on a professional level, share the options, but not share with everybody, and then make sure, I think, commit some time of communication on all aspects of the decision, not just personally, but what is our life going to be like? So almost just make a list, and what you mentioned, to pray over that list, but making sure that you're conscious of all the people and all the things that a decision affects, but with the understanding that you're very staying close to the Lord, and in fellowship, along that way is one thing.
Well, we know, as we say in Retirement Reformation, that we're all called to be faithful for a lifetime. This is just that next step for you, and all of us have a next step. And so thank you very much for joining us, and for being willing to be transparent and to share the part of the journey that God's been on. And we'll look forward to checking in on that next stage of the journey at a point in the future. Jim, what do you think?
That's right. I love it. Thanks, Will Randall. We'll be right back with more on I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation.
The Retirement Reformation website, online at retirementreformation.org, has a growing number of resources designed to help you in what may be the most productive part of your life journey. Let the door open into your last third of life with meaning and purpose, which leads to freedom and joy. Set the loneliness aside and experience the encouragement and support you need through online courses, support groups, books, prayer guides, life direction studies, and webinars, all designed to help find the new direction already planned for you. God does have a plan. Let us help you discover what it is. Make the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org and check out our resources tab. Now back to more I Retire for Him.
Hey, welcome back to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation, as we talk today about fear. And you're like, what does fear have to do with retirement? Honestly, a lot. I live in Florida. I've lived in Florida almost 20 years, Bruce, and I hear fearful comments all the time. And it's fear of losing my good health, fear of losing my ability to think clearly, fear of losing my spouse, fear of losing my ability to drive, fear of not having enough money, fear of losing my relationship with my kids or my grandkids, fear of losing my friends, fear of just so many things. Yet, Bruce, as Christ followers, we're told, don't fear, because fear is a tool of the enemy.
Absolutely. When we get together, just listen to the conversation, particularly amongst many senior groups, whether they be small groups or whatever, as you have, what's that phrase? Oh, what we get is one continuous organ recital.
I was going to say, yeah, we're talking about what's broken in everybody.
Yeah, so
the organ recital. I never heard that organ recital thing. That's awesome.
That is certainly the truth. And when I'm with a group of seniors, and that's the way the conversation is going, it's knees and backs and heads and elbows and feet and whatever. And as I told our small group here a couple of weeks ago, we've developed enough skills of praying for body parts that, in fact, we need to be able to move on to action plans for the future. So, Jim, I was looking, and I had pulled together just a number of quotes that from the Bible that perhaps if I can just read through them will just remind us of those gems that God gives us. So we started, I mentioned, I think in our last segment, the Romans 12:2 about be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be transformed. And your mom talked about that. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then in Philippians 4:6, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. The word out of that jumps out at me is that word thanksgiving. Because by prayer and petition, often with thanksgiving about what it is that God can do, will do, and wants to do for and with us. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So the having our minds, and we were talking about that fear comes from what we're thinking about. And so to be able to guard our minds, and as we talk about growing spiritually, that ability to guard our mind and to be able to transform that into a joyful presence for others,
right,
is absolutely critical. And finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, and whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things.
And in 2 Corinthians 10:5, it talks about holding captive our thoughts. And this is one thing, I'm going to ask you a question in a second, so I want you to be transparent. But, when I get fearful, sometimes you just get your head rolling. You're like, how am I going to make payroll? What am I going to do about this? Whatever that fear may be, I have to just close my eyes and imagine walking into the throne room. Usually I'm crawling into the throne room of God because I'm so embarrassed by my behavior. But getting on my knees before the throne of God and holding up whatever it is that I'm fearful about before the throne of God and say, God, would you please take this from me? Because it's causing me fear. And just imagining the hand of God coming down and scooping it up out of my hands and going, I got this, Jim. As we get older, it's so easy to fall back into those traps of just being fearful, especially because so many of our peers are fearful. And it's a religious discipline to give that to God, a spiritual discipline as a Jesus follower to recognize that we have nothing to fear. The only thing we're guaranteed is death, but that's because our bodies are wearing out and this one needs replacing. But the new one we get won't. So Bruce, what is your biggest fear and how do you deal with it?
My biggest fear is not following God's plan for my life and wanting to make sure that I'm connected to His plan and that I'm willing to step into it with faith so that in fact it will become reality. I think you've heard me tell the story lots of years ago when God first really tested my faith when He said, you need to go to Timbuktu, Mali. And I didn't know that Timbuktu even existed. I had no idea how to get there. And then I found out there were no roads that went from the capital to Timbuktu. And it was just like, you got to be kidding me. Why in the world would I do this? And I remember going home and talking to Judy about that I feel like I'm being called for a specific purpose to go to the ends of the earth. And that was when I learned, was I willing or not? And I was willing to go. And that step of faith has served me so well because when anything that happens that causes that fear to rise up in me, I'm willing to say, am I willing to take that step of faith into what God has planned? And to know that I'm willing to do it, even though it is really, really fearful. Now, in a more applicable sense, just recently, you got how do you know how you're going to get from one place to another? You got your phone and you got Waze or Google Maps or whatever it is that you use, and you're just in the middle of a really complex series of turns, and you lose it. And the thing that you were counting on to tell you what to do next, all of a sudden goes blank. And you go, oh, what am I going to do now? And boy, talk about fear whelming up.
And angry conversations with your spouse.
Oh, and you're glad there's nobody else around to do that is just as good an example as I can find of those moments of fear when all of a sudden you've lost direction, or you believe that you're going to do nothing, or that meaning has purpose. Whenever you're in those situations and you realize that, that's when the fear really shows up for me. And I got to take a big breath, remember who's really in control, and say, okay, what's the next thing for me to step into to be able to be relieved of that fear and to turn that over and to find out then what really is next.
Bruce, how can the Retirement Reformation help our friends who are listening to the podcast today, help them through dealing with fear in their retirement and also giving them purpose in retirement?
I think both those things are tied together. That when you have purpose, you will have less fear because you'll have a plan. You will have charted your course. You'll be listening to what God is saying. You'll be reaching out for the truths that He has and figuring out, how do I apply those in my life? And when you are on that track, fear will be minimized. When you also understand with your head, with your brain, that in fact, when that fear comes up, that you can really know that it's coming not from a place of help, but a place that does not want to help you, and you step into that. So all the tools that we have at the Retirement Reformation help you step into that conversation, and stepping into that conversation about what does God have planned for you, you can make a difference, and you're prepared, are all key items that will take that fear and put it in proper perspective, not in controlling perspective.
And all of that can be found at retirementreformation.org. Thank you, Bruce Bruinsma.
Thanks, Jim. Good to have this conversation.
Yeah, it's good to have it. It's not an easy conversation to have, but good to have it. You've been listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. We're Christ followers, and we're on a journey from retirement to reformation. So we can ultimately say, I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts Jim and Martha Brangenberg and Retirement Reformation founder Bruce Bruinsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.